We continue with the Jesus Project as we face our demons for the month of January. We had originally a Luke 5 story about a leper, many stories in the Scripture about lepers. We've added one from Luke 17, a story about 10 lepers. 10 lepers that were healed by Jesus, and only one returned to give thanks. The power of what happened to him, not only receiving the healing, but the power and wonder of being with Jesus face to face, and the double blessing by simply returning to acknowledge the gift that he received and the one who gave it. Oh, my friends, may we be so thankful, and may we be so open to the wonder and beauty of all God offers us as we move through and beyond facing our demons.
My name is Joram. I've lived in Samaria my whole life. I have a good wife, a son, and a daughter. I provided for my family by making pottery. It was in my working that I first noticed it. Numbness in my hands, followed by swollen patches on my skin. I couldn't believe it, so I just ignored it at first. But when my lips began to puff out and get sore and scaly, I knew I couldn't deny it any longer. I had the most dreaded sickness of my day, leprosy. I had hidden my hands from my wife for a while, but now I couldn't hide its effects on my face. When she noticed the swelling for the first time, she gasped. She knew right away what it was and what it was going to mean for our family. We both cried, and through our tears, we begged God for His mercy. I had no choice. No one really knew what caused leprosy, but everyone knew that it could be transferred between people. I had to leave my home and give up my work. My wife would have to try and support our family by making pottery and baking bread to sell. I've heard of lepers' families who have had to resort to begging to survive. The fate of a leper is not only grim in his body, but in the loss of dignity as well. Early in the illness, most lepers try and conceal their symptoms and beg for alms. I was no exception, but I could only hide the symptoms for so long. As soon as people realized that I was leprous, they would no longer give, but would hurry away, sometimes throwing rocks at me to keep me at a distance. I remember when I was afraid of lepers. By law, I had to announce with a loud voice that I was unclean, unclean. I knew my next step was to go to a gloomy place, the lepers' colony. There, those stricken with the disease could help support each other. The colony was located on the border between Galilee and Samaria. Its residents included Jews, Samaritans, and even some Gentiles. The brotherhood of illness made our differences meaningless. Everyone was equal in the colony. While I was there, I came to be friends with a group of men. All of them were Jews except for me. Sometimes we would go into the closest village together to seek food. There were a few compassionate townspeople who would leave food scraps in a designated place that only my friends and I knew about. One of the helpful townsfolk was an elderly woman named Naomi. Her husband had died from leprosy. She sometimes would watch for us to arrive at the food place and call out to us from a distance. She would always speak an encouraging word to us and tell us to keep faith in God. Hope in God sometimes ran as thin as our ragged clothing in the lepers' colony. One day when we went into the village, there seemed to be a stir. We arrived at the food spot, and Naomi had been waiting for us. She hurried to meet us, calling out, "Come as quickly as you can. We have heard that he is coming down the road toward our village." "Who?" we asked. "The young rabbi from Nazareth, Jesus." That name had been circulating among the colony residents for some time. We had heard that he was a great teacher. More recently, we had heard that he was a man of miracles. Some had even begun to suggest that he might be the Messiah. We were all a bit skeptical, but Naomi urged us to come. She said, "I have a friend who had completely gone deaf. She went to Jesus just last week and her hearing was restored. God is with this man. Please come now." We had learned to trust Naomi, and because of her witness, we were persuaded not only to go, but with hope in our hearts. I could only hope he wouldn't reject a Samaritan. We found Jesus near the edge of the village. Several townspeople had already gathered around him. We drew as close as we dared and called out to him, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." He heard our plea. He looked away from the people around him and said to us, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." That is all he said. That's it, we thought. But nothing had happened. He didn't touch us. He didn't tell us we were healed. We murmured among ourselves for a minute. "Maybe we should just do as he says," I said to my colleagues. As I turned and started back down the road into the village, slowly the others began following me. We had walked only a short distance when I turned to see if all of my group was coming behind me. I stopped suddenly and stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed at my friends. Their faces, their hands, the sores, swollen places, and disfigurements were gone. They were all clean. They began to look back at me with the same amazement. I was clean too. Me, a Samaritan. I guess we were all equal in God's grace. Oh, we laughed aloud, we cried, and we started off again into the village. Some wanted to go straight home. Others of us wanted to go find the priests. Now we knew why Jesus had told us to go to the priests. Jesus? Jesus! I turned back around quickly and saw Jesus and the others watching us. I hurried back toward Jesus. As I did, a psalm burst forth from me. "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. His mercy endures forever." I fell on my knees before Jesus and looked up at him. He was still watching my group, yet there was a look of disappointment on his face. He said, "Where are your friends? Weren't there 10 of you?" I looked back to see that they had all continued into the village. I was the only one who had come back. He said to the townspeople gathered around him, most of whom were Jews, "Could no one come back and give praise to God except for this foreigner?" I felt a little sheepish when he said that. But then I looked up at Jesus and said, Master, look, look." He looked at my clean hand and then took it in his hand. It was the first time I had felt the warmth of a human touch in so long. Then he looked at my face. I said, "Thank you. Thank you for healing my friends. Thank you for healing me. I thank God for you." Just then the pain in his face melted into the biggest, brightest smile I've ever seen. He tightened his grip on my hand and placed the other hand on the side of my face. He raised me up off my knees and pulled me in close to himself and looked straight into my eyes. He seemed to be looking deeper, as if into my very soul. And he said to me, "Thank you for your faith. It has made you well. Now go and show yourself to the priests, and then go home and see your wife and children." He smiled again, squeezed my hand, and then rejoined his followers. I looked back over my shoulder. I could barely see my friends who were still moving away, leaping and skipping with joy. I wanted to call out to them to come back, but they were too far away. Jesus and his followers became surrounded by the townspeople as they headed into the village. One stayed behind. It was Naomi. She had seen what had happened. She actually embraced me, and I thanked her for helping us to not miss Jesus. She went to catch up with the villagers to see what else he might do. Even though I couldn't wait to see my family, I just stood there watching Jesus until I could see him no more. I knew I would have to return soon to the lepers' colony as a witness, much like Naomi had been for us. I will never forget that day. I'll never forget what it was like to be touched by the power of God. I'll never forget what it felt like to realize that God was in Jesus. But I think I will remember most of all the expression on his face when I simply said, "Thank you."
When I was the chaplain at the Methodist Children's Home in Waco, Texas,
I had an incredible staff for all the 12 years I was there, and one of the persons that I was blessed to work with was an African-American minister named Jimmy. Jimmy and I grew to be more than just co-workers. We grew to be friends. At the work that bound us together at the home, we enjoyed one another's company, and we did a lot of lunches together. As I began to share in those lunches with Jimmy, as we'd go into a restaurant, I began to notice something quite peculiar, and especially when we were with a group of people, because most of the time Jimmy was the only African American that was at the table. I noticed that Jimmy was always served last. I continued to watch that play out until finally one day, after we had had lunch together with a group of folks and we were back at our offices, I asked him to come into my office, and I asked him point blank, I said, Jimmy, I've noticed something. I've noticed that when we go out to eat and we share at table together, especially with a group, that you're always the one that's served last. Well, do you think that has something to do with the fact that you're African American? And he confirmed that. I said, Jimmy, how do you feel about that? And he said, well, Travis, he said, I don't like it. But it's amazing what you get used to and what you settle for. The story today, my friends, is all about judgment, and it's all about the other. It's all about those on the margins of culture and society, and especially community related to faith. The story today from Luke about the 10 lepers that received the healing is a story that identifies and uncovers for us some very uncomfortable things about what it means to be human. If you remember the story that was read earlier, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He's on the border between Galilee and Samaria. And as he makes his way to Jerusalem, he comes into a village, and on the outskirts of the village, he runs across 10 lepers. And as the lepers see Jesus entering the village on the outskirts, they are, of course, on the other side of the road, because that was a common way for them to do life as they were ostracized and as they were seen as marginal. So they yell out to Jesus, hey, master, teacher, Jesus, show mercy, have mercy upon us. And Jesus does. And he says, go and show yourselves to the priest. For you see, the priest had the role in Jewish community of being the one that both identified a disease such as leprosy and then followed the rule of Leviticus that ostracized and marginalized and separated them out of the community, as well as the one who had the power and authority to recognize that they were healed and give them permission to re-enter life in the community. And so the lepers did as Jesus said, and on their way to the priest, they were healed. And one returned. He ran Jesus down. He found Jesus. And when he did, he fell at the feet of Jesus prostrate on the ground and praised God and thanked Jesus for the healing. And Jesus looks at the man and he said, were not 10 healed? Where are the other 9? Is the only one that's returned is this foreigner, this Samaritan? And then he says to the man, go. Your faith has made you well. Leprosy was an awful disease. It still is today, and yet we have a cure for it. Back then, there was no cure for it. If you Google leprosy, what you learn is these are the symptoms as well as the consequences of what leprosy means. Disfigurement, hair loss, even your eyebrows and eyelashes. Nerve damage to your arms and your hands and your feet, the inability to use them. Chronic nasal congestion, nosebleeds, the collapse of the nasal septum. Imagine that. Glaucoma, blindness, eventually kidney failure and death. It was believed in Jesus' time, because medicine was not available, that it was highly contagious. And so thus the reasons for the law that immediately when someone was diagnosed by the priest with leprosy, they were completely excommunicated and marginalized from the community to keep everyone else safe. It was also believed theologically in that community that the reason for the disease was that the person or the family of the person had sinned against God, and God had punished the person with the disease. So not only did they have a disease that they had nothing to do with in the terms we understand today, but they also received the judgment from the community of faith that now they were outside of the community's help, support, love, acceptance, care, and they were seen as other. Oh, we all know lepers, don't we? Those who are judged because they're not like us. Why, we have lepers in our own lives, do we not? They don't share the same belief system we do. Not a part of our tribe. My friend Jimmy was seen as a leper, judged because of the color of his skin. And judgments like that and others are tearing our democracy apart. We watch it every day. Well, I was the chaplain at the Methodist Children's Home, and the Methodist Children's Home is a residential facility, 130 acres, and a 2,500-acre boys ranch east of town that takes care of about 250 students that are at risk. Their families are at risk for a variety of reasons, most of which are not good. And one of my roles there as a chaplain over that community of faith was to go and take ambassadors, students with me, to local churches and to tell the story of the home. And I would do that, Sunday school classes, worship services, and many times as a part of the story I would tell and the reasons that the kids were where they were is at the end of my talk and after some question and answer period, I would say and ask the question many times, I said, do you think you have any kids like this in your community? You know, and there was, a mixed reaction many times. And I would always close by saying, wherever I was, depending on the number, I would say, well, we have 13 of your kids at the Methodist Children's Home. My friends, part of the challenge before the church is to know our neighbors, is to know our communities, and especially those who are on the margins, especially those that every day face the judgments of a culture that has become very good at judgment. Because like Jesus, our role as the manifestation in this season of Epiphany of the love of God in ways that make a difference to real people in real places. I give thanks every day for this congregation and the work that we do related to that through the villages, certainly with our VAST program as we provide help and tutoring for children that need us, families that need us. And yet, my friends, there are many others out there that are experiencing, because of the pandemic, because of what's gone on in the last year, the love of God and the belonging and the acceptance of God in a way maybe they never have before, because they have become a part of the tragedy of all that's happened in 2020. And I don't know about you, but I want to be a part of the sharing of God's love and experiencing God's love in a way that seeks to continue to expand and reach beyond ourselves, to find those people, to know who they are. I got good news for you. We had a blessing today over the thrift shop, and I'm excited about that ministry and how we're going to re-engage the community there to provide that ministry for folks that need it so desperately, who have missed it during this season of pandemic. We, like Jesus, need to be a part of the healing. And we don't judge people, just as he didn't. I thought it was interesting when the Samaritan returned and Jesus said, well, weren't 10 healed? Where are the other 9? Only one returned to give thanks, to realize that something bigger than he was going on there, to seek the connection, to follow up, to at least in generosity and thanks express gratitude. What about the other 9? For you see, because he returned, it was a double blessing. Not only was he healed from the leprosy, not only would he be reinstated when he went to see the priest, but now because of the connection with the author of God's love, who became the vessel and instrument through which he received the healing, he now receives something much more than that. He receives the power of the kingdom of God and the epiphany of the manifestation of not only the healing, but of the relationship that God offers and the presence of God in the midst of whatever life would bring him from that point on. And you see, my friends, that's the greatest gift that we have to give those that we serve too. It's not just about going and meeting the need. It's about going and witnessing that there's more than just feeding. There's more than just providing tutoring. That there is a relationship and an opportunity to be the presence of God's love in a way that transcends and transforms and opens the door for such epiphanies as indeed those that we serve both experience that love of God, and they too begin to realize that they have the capacity to be more than a victim, but to join in the loving as God has called them as God's child, and as God is now gifting them to utilize their story in a way that transforms and transcends. We have lots of work to do, don't we? To be that kind of loving, to be the witness and the vessel and instrument of that kind of opportunity, where it becomes more than just about the healing, but it becomes the opportunity to open the door to something far grander and greater. For you see, too many people get stuck in just making life about themselves. And many of them have never had the opportunity to be led and loved and accepted as they are in a way that engages them and offers them the invitation to extend, to expand their understanding of who they are into a story connected to others and to the larger story of God. Psychologist Gene Houston says, when mythical material remains latent, unused, and unexplored, it can lead to pathological behavior. And that's the antithesis of what we're talking about here related to this story. What happened to the other 9? Well, I imagine they took what they got from Jesus and they continued the small lives that maybe they were leading before then, without ever even realizing who and what was a part of the healing. You see, my friends, as the church, we carry a great responsibility to make and help people, not only by feeding them and helping them, but also by making them a part, to break out of the barriers to a bigger world, to a larger experience, to a great God of abundance that loves and calls them to. I will tell you, this leper's life, this Samaritan, this foreigner was never the same again. And neither should all of those that we serve as we seek to witness to what we know too. Last week, I was on my Facebook page, and I ran across a Facebook post from Danny and Stephen. Danny and Stephen were out at the boys' ranch when I was there. They were roommates in the Fabian home unit. And they were working downtown somewhere, didn't say. And they ran into one another. They had lunch together. And it was a picture of both of those men. They were boys when I knew them. They came from really rough backgrounds. People had already given up on them. So cruel was their judgment. Nothing would infuriate me more than people to judge our kids with information that they didn't have enough to make such a judgment. And there they were on the page. And in their comment, they referred to the fact that not only were they roommates in the home, they both got scholarships because of what the home provided. They went on to college, and they were roommates in college. And they got degrees. And you see, their story became a story that didn't get trapped in the small world of the South, but because of the ministry of the Methodist Children's Home, by which this church supports, they were offered an opportunity and community and an invitation to grow. They're both deeply persons of faith. I keep up with them.
You see, my friends, the responsibility that is ours. Because if you and I, and if not our church, then who in this culture? Oh, yes, my friends, we all have lepers in our lives. My challenge to us is to move beyond our judgments, to move beyond whatever hinders us and keeps us from being the Christ with the transforming message of the good news that changes and transforms and breaks through barriers, that everybody everywhere might be a part of the beloved community and might know the love of God that heals and transforms.